The forest was silent that night, cloaked in shadows that stretched like whispers beneath the pale moonlight. An eerie stillness hung in the air as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Every step seemed to echo through the undergrowth, though no other sounds accompanied it. He moved carefully, senses alert, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon him. Somewhere nearby, something shifted in the darkness just beyond his line of sight. He froze, scanning the shadows, but saw nothing. The stories he'd heard about this place, tales of strange sightings and ancient creatures, drifted through his mind.
He'd brushed them off as myth, as tales spun by those too eager to give life to the unknown.
Yet tonight those tales felt all too real. A flicker of movement caught his eye again, a shadow blending seamlessly into the darkness before disappearing once more. His heart beat faster, instinct urging him to retreat, yet curiosity kept him rooted to the spot. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, its narrow beam cutting through the trees but revealing nothing but endless darkness. And then she appeared. She emerged from the shadows as if woven from the night itself, her form graceful and tall. Her skin held a faint violet hue, glistening like stardust under the moonlight. Her eyes were like polished silver, reflecting the light with an intensity that left him breathless. She wore armor, sleek and close-fitting, each piece crafted from materials that seemed both organic and metallic in the dim light. In her hands was a bow, unlike anything he'd ever seen, a weapon forged from an alien material that shimmered and twisted with the light. She held it loosely. Her posture relaxed, yet there was an unmistakable power in her stance, a predatory elegance that sent a shiver down his spine. For a long moment neither of them moved. Her gaze lingered on him, taking him in as if assessing him, and he felt as though he were being weighed by something ancient, something dangerous. She tilted her head, a faint smirk playing at her lips, her eyes narrowing slightly in amusement. "Human," she murmured, her voice low and almost musical. "You're far from home." He swallowed hard, his voice catching in his throat. This was no ordinary encounter, no myth or legend given shape by imagination. She was real, standing before him with all the lethal beauty of a creature who thrived in shadows. His voice finally returned, though barely above a whisper. "Who? What are you?" Her smirk widened, the silver in her eyes gleaming. "I am Niara," she said, her tone both playful and deadly serious. "And you are my prey." A surge of fear mixed with something stranger and more thrilling ran through him. She watched him with a gaze that was both curious and predatory, as if toying with the idea of what he was and what he might become. He felt rooted to the ground, unable to look away, unable to run. The silence stretched between them, thick and charged. Her fingers traced the edge of her bow, a faint glimmer of light catching on the weapon's curved surface. She seemed almost amused by his reaction, as if this encounter was nothing more than a game to her. He struggled to maintain composure, to find something to say that might unravel her intentions. "Why me?" he finally asked, his voice steady, though his pulse raced. "What do you want?" She took a step closer, her movements fluid and deliberate, her gaze never leaving his. "I am here because I have chosen you human," she replied. "And if you prove yourself worthy, you may live to know why." Her words hung in the air, cryptic and laced with danger. Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving him standing alone in the moonlit clearing, heart pounding with questions he had no answers to. But he knew one thing for certain. This encounter was only the beginning, and whatever her purpose, whatever her game, he was already ensnared. The days that followed were a blur of shadows and silence. He didn't see her. Not fully. Yet her presence was constant, haunting the edge of his senses. Every time he thought he'd escaped, thought he'd found a moment to breathe, a flicker of movement or a faint rustle would remind him that she was near, watching, waiting. At first, he tried to leave the forest, to retrace his steps and return to the safety of civilization, but each attempt felt like walking in circles. Every path seemed to lead him deeper, back toward her hunting ground, and he began to wonder if he was meant to leave at all. The forest was transforming around him. It felt less like a place and more like a labyrinth, each shadow concealing secrets he couldn't see, every branch bending to an invisible will. Even the air felt thicker, charged with an energy that seemed to pulse with each step he took. One evening, as dusk settled into a deep, oppressive twilight, he sensed her closer than before. He froze, his breath catching as he scanned the trees, knowing she was there, knowing she was watching. Then he heard her laugh, soft, low, almost teasing, a sound that sent a thrill of fear and excitement down his spine. "Still trying to run?" she called, her voice carrying through the trees, a melodic taunt that felt more like a challenge. The forest was alive with shadows, each one stretching and shifting like phantoms, merging with the darkness as he pressed deeper into its heart. He moved with purpose now, following her trail, no longer running but drawn forward, his mind focused, his body tense. Nyara was out there, waiting, and he knew that this time he wouldn't hesitate. Every step brought him closer, yet each step seemed to test his resolve. The sounds of the forest faded into silence as if even the trees themselves were watching, waiting for what would come next. And then, in a small clearing bathed in silver moonlight, he found her. Nyara stood at the center of the clearing, her back turned to him, her posture relaxed yet purposeful. Her bow was at her side, her gaze fixed on the stars above, their pale light casting an ethereal glow over her violet skin. For the first time, he saw something in her stance that he hadn't noticed before. A stillness, almost a sadness. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his foot crunching softly on the fallen leaves. She turned, her silver eyes meeting his, and he felt a weight in that gaze, a depth that he had only glimpsed before. "You found me," she said, her voice soft, almost relieved. "I'm not here to run anymore," he replied, his tone steady. "Whatever this is, whatever you've been trying to show me, I'm ready to face it." She regarded him in silence, her gaze intense, searching. After a moment, she let out a sigh, as though releasing a burden she had carried alone for far too long. "Then it is time you understood." She took a step toward him, her expression solemn. "My people, we are bound by an ancient right, one that demands we seek out those who possess both strength and heart. I was sent to find someone worthy, someone who could endure the hunt and emerge on the other side, as my equal." He frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Equal? What does that mean?" "It means," she continued, her voice carrying a hint of vulnerability, "that I sought not a prey, but a partner, one who could stand beside me, who could share in my journey, and who could bring balance to my life." The realization washed over him, the truth dawning like a sunrise after a long, dark night. The hunt had never been about survival or conquest. It had been about connection, about finding someone who could match her, who could understand her, despite the vastness that separated them. "So, this was never about capturing or defeating me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head, her eyes softening. "No, it was about finding someone who could walk beside me, who would not flee at the first sign of danger, who would seek the truth with courage." He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a hunter or a stranger, but as someone who had searched as he had, who had been bound by duty and tradition yet longed for something more. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice steady yet filled with curiosity. She smiled, a warmth lighting her features he had not seen before. "Now, you have a choice. You may return to your world, to the life you knew before, and this will all become nothing but a memory, a story of shadows in the forest. Or, he prompted, taking a step closer. "Or you can join me," she said, her gaze unwavering. "To embrace the unknown, to stand by my side as we face what lies beyond this world, to leave behind the life you knew, and to create something new." For a long moment, he was silent, the weight of her words settling over him like a cloak. The life he had known seemed small, distant, compared to the path she offered. There was fear, yes, but there was also a thrill, a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for far too long. He looked into her eyes, his decision clear. "I choose you, Nyara." Her face softened, and she extended her hand, her fingers brushing against his in a gesture both powerful and intimate. "Then you are no longer prey. You are no longer alone." Together, they stood in the clearing, the stars above them, the forest around them. In that moment, they were bound by a silent pact, a union forged not from tradition or duty, but from a shared understanding, a bond deeper than words. As they left the forest together, he knew that his life would never be the same. He had found something he hadn't known he was searching for, a purpose, a path, and someone to walk beside him as he faced the unknown. For the first time, he was not alone, and neither was she. He turned, searching for her, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "What is this to you?" he demanded, his voice breaking through the silence. Some kind of game? Her silhouette emerged from the shadows, distant yet close enough for him to make out her violet skin, her silver eyes gleaming in the fading light. She held her bow loosely, almost casually, but there was an undeniable strength in her stance. A game? She repeated, tilting her head with that same faint smirk. No, human. This is a test. A test? He echoed, trying to understand. A test for what? She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. For survival. For strength. For worthiness. His breath hitched as she approached, the space between them shrinking until he could see the intricate markings on her armor, the way her silver eyes seemed to see through him, as if she could read the very thoughts he tried to hide. Why me? He asked, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. What do you see in me that's worth this pursuit? For a moment, she was silent, her gaze intense and unreadable. Then she reached out, one gloved hand grazing his shoulder in a touch that was both gentle and possessive, as though claiming something that was already hers. You're different, she said, her voice soft, her eyes locked on his. Stronger than the others. Smarter. Perhaps you are worthy of something more. The words sent a chill through him, though he couldn't say why. He felt a strange pull toward her, a connection that went beyond fear, beyond logic. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, an enigma wrapped in power and mystery. Her very presence a challenge he couldn't ignore. Worthy of what? He asked, his voice barely audible. She looked at him, her smirk fading, replaced by something deeper, something that looked almost like regret, worthy of understanding me, of knowing the truth behind this hunt. Without another word, she turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving him alone once more. But this time, he didn't feel abandoned. He felt as though he had been given a choice, a chance to understand the mystery that surrounded her. As night settled over the forest, he made his decision. He would follow her, would face whatever lay ahead. He knew now that there was no escape from her, no escape from the path he had been set upon. The only way forward was through the hunt itself. And as he took his first step into the darkness, he realized that he was no longer the hunted. He was becoming the hunter. They moved through the forest side by side, their footsteps silent as they left the clearing behind, deeper into the heart of the land where only shadows had dared to tread. The dense trees began to thin, revealing an open sky filled with stars more brilliant than he had ever seen, their light casting a pale glow across Nyara's face, softening the warrior's resolve in her gaze. As they walked, he sensed a change in her, a quiet tension, as if she were carrying the weight of a choice not yet spoken. When they reached a ridge overlooking the valley below, she finally stopped, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I never thought I would find someone who could walk this path with me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My people, the last of my kind, entrusted me with a mission, but I thought I would be carrying it out alone. He listened, sensing the significance of her words, the unspoken history woven into every syllable. What mission? He asked gently, sensing she was ready to share a part of herself she had kept hidden. She drew in a deep breath, her silver eyes reflecting the distant stars. When the Drexians came, they destroyed nearly everything we held sacred, the lands, the temples. Even the ancestral spirits bound to them were lost. My people scattered across the stars, fractured, each one of us bearing a small piece of what we once were. Her voice tightened, and he could hear the pain she had carried in silence, the loneliness she had borne as part of her duty. We have an ancient right, a task each of us must fulfill when we are chosen. I am the last huntress, and my duty is to protect our legacy, to preserve what little remains, and, if I find one who is worthy, to pass that legacy on. He looked at her, understanding now that the hunt had been more than a test for him. It had been a trial for her as well, a test of her own endurance and will. She had carried the weight of her people's hopes and fears, her identity bound to the traditions she fought to keep alive. So you're saying I'm part of this legacy? He asked, realizing the depth of what she was offering. She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his. If you choose this, if you choose me, we will walk together as protectors of a lineage that was nearly lost. But it is not an easy path. The Drexians and others like them will continue to hunt us, to seek what they could not destroy. He felt the weight of her words, the gravity of the choice she was giving him. He thought of the life he would be leaving behind, the comforts of familiarity, the certainty of the world he knew. Yet that life seemed small and distant, a shadow compared to the vivid, boundless world she was offering. What would this path look like? He asked, his voice steady, willing to hear everything before he decided. She moved closer, taking his hands in hers, her touch both firm and gentle, grounding him. We will become guardians, travelers bound by purpose. We will seek out the scattered remnants of my people, those who still remember the old ways. Together, we will rebuild, piece by piece, what was taken from us. He felt a surge of something deep and powerful, an instinct, a sense of destiny, and above all, a fierce loyalty to the woman standing before him, who had shared both her fears and her strength. I want to be part of this, he said, his voice strong and sure. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to face it with you. For a long moment, she looked at him, her eyes filled with a softness that belied the warrior beneath. She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. Then we are bound, not by blood or ritual, but by choice. The journey ahead will not be easy, but you will never be alone. They stood on the ridge, their hands still entwined, their gazes locked as the stars watched above. He felt a surge of exhilaration, of purpose, as if the world itself had opened its arms, embracing them in the promise of the unknown. After a moment, she turned to him, her expression resolute. There is one last thing we must do before we leave this place. What's that? He asked, curious. Without answering, she led him back through the forest, her steps confident, guiding him as if she knew every path, every shadow, every hidden corner of the woods. They finally arrived at a clearing where a great stone stood, covered in markings he couldn't understand, symbols of her people, ancient and enduring, carved into the stone with a precision that spoke of reverence. Nyara knelt before the stone, motioning for him to join her. This is a marker of my people's presence on this world, she explained, her voice soft. It is a beacon, a reminder, and for me, it has always been a place of farewell. He knelt beside her, listening in silence as she touched the stone, her fingers tracing the symbols with a gentleness that conveyed both respect and loss. Today, I bid farewell to the life I once knew, she said, her gaze distant, her voice carrying the weight of her people's legacy. With you by my side, we begin anew. They rose together, their bond solidified, and as they turned away from the stone, he felt a part of himself transform. He was no longer merely a scientist, an observer of life's mysteries. He was a partner, a guardian, bound to a purpose that transcended his own understanding. The night deepened around them as they made their way out of the forest. In the clearing, he saw a faint glimmer in the distance, a small, sleek craft hidden beneath a camouflage of vines and branches. It was Nyara's ship, her means of travel between worlds, and he realized that this would be his last glimpse of Earth for a long time, if not forever. As they boarded the craft, Nyara took the pilot's seat, her movements precise, confident. He sat beside her, feeling the hum of the engine beneath him, the thrill of the journey already coursing through his veins. With a final glance back at the forest, at the life he was leaving behind, he felt a quiet peace settle within him. The unknown lay ahead, vast and intimidating. Yet beside Nyara, it felt like a place he was meant to be. She turned to him as the craft began to rise, her gaze soft yet resolute. Are you ready? She asked, her voice carrying a warmth he hadn't heard before. He nodded, his answer unwavering. Yes, let's begin. And as they soared into the night sky, the stars opened before them, vast and boundless, welcoming them into the mysteries beyond. Their journey had just begun, a journey of purpose, of resilience, and of love born from the most unexpected encounter. Together, they would face the dangers ahead, guardians of a legacy forged from both survival and hope, bound not just by tradition, but by the choice they had made to walk this path side by side. And as they disappeared into the stars, the echoes of their bond lingered in the vastness of the universe, a reminder that even amidst shadows and loss, there was light to be found, a legacy to protect, and a future waiting to be forged.